Hey Joyce. Sorry, I was gonna say hey everybody, but I said hey Joyce. Um,
I am everyone.
Joyce is everyone's one with Joyce. Okay, hey everyone. So we have a very special guest on my show, which is Joyce. She's been here in the show before. She's incredibly insightful, and she has a really incredible YouTube channel you should check out, and it's called Type Talks. So be sure to check that out. I have a link to it down below. Joyce has this really interesting idea. And what she wants to share is that she believes that wholeness is the path to aliveness. So, Joyce, could you tell us about this idea?
Yeah. So I believe intimacy with our wholeness is the path to aliveness because a lot in our life, we feel that we have to separate ourselves from our wholeness. And this means that we are told that it's not okay to be are the expression of us in our totality. And so we create mass in different situations. We people please,
Hmm.
we act inauthentic, or we feel pressure to be a certain way in that it's useful to the scenario. And so,
Right.
in a way, you become farther and farther from yourself as you grow older. Children don't deal with this as much because until you feel shame, I feel like that shame causes that separation from these parts of yourself. And so you'll see that children have this youthful energy that they seem happy in the world. There's this childlike joy. They're more creative because they're not worried about cutting off parts of themselves to fit in.
We, over time, when we grow up, we learn to suppress different parts of ourselves. Before we felt free to be who we are, but due to society, these parts of ourselves are cut off.
Yeah, and I would say this applies to everyone because shame is a universal human phenomenon. Some people might experience it more extremely than other people. And so that's what they call toxic shame that Heidi Priebe talks a lot about. And a lot of today's conversation is inspired by a chat I had with Heidi Priebe yesterday.
Hmm.
So kudos and
Be
shout
sure
out.
to check out. Is that online?
It's not online, but we're writing a book on it because she's like, this is a great concept. And then she had the idea of saying, Joyce, do you want to write a book? And I was like, she's one of my favorite authors. So I'm like,
Yeah. She's a
yes,
great author.
she is a great author. Yeah. So that's happening. And so we had a chat about how activation is different than wholeness. And aliveness. So people can get them confused. They're like, "Oh, I feel so activated," which is a feeling of feeling temporarily stimulated. They're
Hmm.
like, "Hey, I'm feeling this buzz from the situation." And they think that that's aliveness.
Hmm.
And that could be a glimpse into aliveness, a fraction of it, or it could actually be fool's gold, telling you that, hey, you're feeling this great feeling, but it's actually taking you farther away from who you actually want to become.
Right. So you're
And
talking about here temporary stimulation. So people might find some ways to kind of excite their system, right? They might go to the club, for example, or they might like go crazy, all out crazy on their job. And
yeah,
but that's just a glimmer of having a sense of meaning in life. There's nothing wrong with these activities in themselves, but there's something deeper at bay here.
exactly.
Hmm.
And it could also be a way to transcend yourself. And so you're doing all of these things to get away from yourself because at some way in form you're ashamed of who you are and you haven't accepted who you are. And so you use
Right.
all these behaviors to run away from yourself.
Mhm.
And so you spend your whole life trying to transcend yourself, which is actually a really sad, well, I think it's sad in itself because it means that you feel happy when you're relieved that you're getting farther from your essence. And
Yeah,
that
there's the
makes,
kind of like a sense of that you're not good enough.
yeah, it's like you're
Hmm.
living your whole life with a fundamental premise that you're not good enough.
Hmm.
And that separation is actually a lack of aliveness.
Hmm.
And so my solution to this is having intimacy with your wholeness. And this means being able to live in your totality, being accepted for your totality and valued and seen like that matters. And I believe that that is the greatest degree of aliveness and also the greatest degree of human dignity. And
Hmm.
so I found that I did not experience a sense of human dignity until I was 26 years old.
Hmm.
And that was when people actually understood what I was saying. And I actually could have conversations that felt like dialogues rather than monologues. And that was mind-blowing to me because previously in life, I had felt invisible. And so when you actually have people who can speak your language, then you don't have to spend your lifetime trying to translate your soul. And I realized that I didn't feel dignity down in my core until I had these friends in my life, or I started nerding out on YouTube and people appreciated that nerding out, that I felt like people can handle my wholeness in a way.
You're talking about the sense of unconditional self-acceptance is something that other people support, and they foster that kind of environment so that allows your inner self to be safe, being okay with being itself.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is really important because sometimes we can mix up approval and human dignity. And so people can approve of us. They can like the face that we put on. It's like, Joyce, I love the way that you help me. You're a great people pleaser, but they're not actually approving of your wholeness. And so human dignity is when someone gives you dignity in the totality, not just a snapshot of who you are, but actually being able to take the amalgamation of that and accept and hold space for that. Otherwise, if people are only able to reflect back fragmented versions of you back to you, then all you can ever see is fragmented versions of yourself back to yourself. And then you don't even know if you have a wholeness.
Right.
And so this is an identity, an existential crisis of its own.
Yeah, but it's kind of like the sense that if people could really just allow you to be who you are, they kind of almost act like a mirror so you could see yourself clearly.
Exactly. And so if you don't have a mirror, what you can do is you can actually look a lot for external validation, or you could just try to escape yourself by keeping on moving. And so when you don't have a mirror, then you can't really have a solid sense of self. And if you don't have a solid sense of self, you go through life being a leaf in the wind and you blow around, but you don't really feel a sense of purpose. So you really need a sense of self in order to feel a sense of purpose. And so all things trickle from there.
So like once you learn to accept yourself, it's interesting that you're not trying to transcend yourself, but when you accept yourself, that's a path to you finding who you are and following the path that's best for you.
Exactly. And instead of spending your whole life trying to transcend yourself, instead you can transcend your feeling of feeling not good enough. And I feel like that's the root of it. If we can transcend our feeling of not feeling good enough, all these other beautiful things will follow. Otherwise, if there is that moment of that initial belief that you're not good enough, you're going to do so many things in your life that betray yourself. Like you might get married to someone you're totally not compatible with because you're trying to meet a milestone because your parents want you to get married. And now you're doing all these decisions because you don't have that sense of self to really tell you which way is right or wrong. Or you might not even have enough self-confidence, even if you do have a sense of what to do in your life to follow your purpose. Or you don't even need a purpose. Sometimes a purpose is just not letting yourself feel pressured to have a purpose from other people.
Right.
It's just this sense of wholeness. If it's missing, you have a void.
The thing is, we don't need to pressure ourselves to have a purpose or have other people pressure us. Once we accept ourselves, we tap into this really like infinite resource within that allows us to drive towards the purpose that it's already naturally there.
Exactly. So you stop suppressing your own sense of purpose and replacing it with other things. Yeah. And so sometimes people will say, especially if they're religious, that there is a God-shaped hole in everyone's hearts. And I think that there's a grain of truth to that, in that we all have a hole in our hearts for a sense of wholeness. And God, for some people's paradigms, can provide that. But also there is that hole that comes from you seek to self-actualize. Every human being has a desire to self-actualize. Some people might have it at the forefront of their mind, and some people might have it at the back burner.
Right.
It's always there. There is that void in our hearts that wants to grow, that wants to become better, that wants to be challenged, and we want to thrive and be creative. There is the hole in our hearts for a sense of community that allows us to have our greatest creative expression.
Right. So. Yeah, I could definitely see this from my own experience, like working with clients myself. You could see that there's a drive, whether conscious or unconscious, to self-realize, and there's a need to kind of challenge oneself and to be able to discover oneself at a deeper level at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's not met, you do feel a little bit empty because you have a desire to meet your own potential, and you'll always have that dull aching if you don't try to meet that potential.
Right.
And sometimes that potential is just met by someone holding space for our wholeness. So
Mm.
then we have an idea of how we can honor our own wholeness as much as we can. Because if we can't see it, we can't honor it. And so then we can go our whole lives neglecting our wholeness without someone mirroring back to us a sense
Right.
of wholeness in ourselves.
Right. And by the way, Joyce is a great coach. So we want to get her services and have someone hold space for the sense of wholeness, then definitely reach out to her.
You're so sweet, Leon. And so when it comes to the sense of wholeness, we can feel the sense of wholeness when we're able to give an aspect of ourselves and other people don't shame it and they hold space for it. They can be a witness to it. And when we have what Heidi calls enlightened witnesses in our lives, then we have people who not only hold space for our wholeness, but they are on their own path to this too, and they can offer advice or insights on the things that we share.
Mm-hmm.
And so you almost have a mentor on your journey to becoming whole when you share more of yourself. And that's very empowering because I feel like we live life very disempowered. If you go to any workplace, you'll have bosses complaining about their workers, just listening to every command they say without creatively thinking for themselves. It's like, why do my subordinates need me to tell them the exact instructions to do something, and they don't take the creative freedom to think for themselves to do stuff? And I think that this is really deeply rooted in society, that we're told that we have to do things a specific way or we get punished. And so we learn to listen to our parents. We learn to listen to our spouses or our friends and follow their script so we don't get hurt. And then this creates a compliance that actually disempowers you from accessing your inner resources and becoming more of your whole self.
Right.
And so I find that this thing that our bosses complain about actually is this deeply rooted in our subconscious as a society.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's very much true. So society blocks itself from being able to realize ourselves.
And I think that it'll also help people to feel okay to fail, because I feel like that's an element to being whole. It's you're given a safe space, a laboratory to fail in, because this is where you actually understand your whole self. You have to take risks, and that can be scary when your acceptance in society is on the line. And so people don't have those safe little spaces to take risks. And I believe that's the first step to becoming whole. That's when you have friends where you can say things and you don't have to feel like you're walking on eggshells. Then you can actually present your whole self. Some of the things that alert us that we want to tap more into our whole self is when we are limerent for another person. So let's say
when you're what? Limerent?
When you're limerent. So there's this word called limerence, and Heidi has videos on it. And it's basically talking about you will swoon over someone and you'll basically have a mini crush over them. And this is a sign that they have something that you would like in your life too. And by being around them, you're able to access this side of yourself more. So it's almost your inner desire to be whole is manifested in your crushes towards people or the people you admire, because they're either who you want to be, or they have traits that you already appreciate right now. So they embody something. So even if you ignore your desire to become whole, it'll speak to you in these weird ways where you direct your attention, who you like, and it guides your life either way. And you'll call it fate, but there is a mechanism behind it.
How do you use this understanding in order to be able to find a pathway to self-integrate?
You can use this information to self-integrate by finding your tribe that makes you feel like you're able to be whole. I find that a lot of my friends who struggle to feel whole in childhood because they grew up in the wrong family or they were put into circumstance that weren't really theirs, when they start going into places where they share interests with those people, or they put
Mm-hmm.
themselves out there and they get rewarded for it, their paradigm changes.
Right.
And so I believe that we are able to use this knowledge by letting the communities around us that allow us to be whole to sculpt us with their love. So
Mm-hmm.
there's actually the word character, and one of the root words for character is allowing yourself to be sculpted. And so in a way, you actually allow yourself to be sculpted by the people in your life who love you, and you create this ability to be whole by surrounding yourself by people who encourage this in you. So what I'm proposing is you can encourage an environment around you
Mm-hmm.
where you're able to feel alive, where you're able to find the places where you're able to be a nerd, and that's rewarded.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all have our different form of nerdiness. I know you have a passion that, or you have something that makes life worth living for you. I know a lot of content creators who have felt this phenomenon that I'm describing. They get over it by they're seeing this community who is like, your piece of work has changed my life. You are a lifesaver. And I'm sure, Leon, the stuff that you've created, you've probably changed people's lives in ways that you couldn't imagine. And so in a way, that's a deep sense of acceptance. And so you know that you're a valuable part of community. You're more real. And so it's interesting when our contributions aren't valued, we can feel less real. It's like, am I really a real person? You feel a little bit invisible.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, anything I do, it isn't impactful for anything around me. And so you actually have a crisis of realness when no one accepts what you have to offer. So the way that you can use this to integrate is find places where you don't feel invisible. Find places that value your contributions, and it'll be a guiding source or guiding light in your life.
Yeah, just be able to find the people in your life that could really appreciate you for who you are. Well, one final question. So say that you can't find those people as of yet. What would you do then?
You can always have that relationship with yourself. And so in a way, you can see the great things about yourself by noticing that the people you admire, they also can contain a bit of you in them too. And so if you think Leon's really cool, he has these qualities of being a good listener, he's great at summarizing things, he's a lovely person to talk to, and he's on the path to spiritual and emotional and personal growth. And so if you admire Leon, then it means that one of your values as a human being is personal growth, or something along the lines of the Leonness too. So you realize that the things that you admire are also things that exist within yourself that you may not be tapping into yet. There's this quote by Michelangelo where he talks about, he doesn't sculpt angels. He actually sees the angel already inside, and he's just setting them free. And so you already have the quality inside you that is amazing, that is lovable, that is precious, and you're just letting it free when you're letting it express itself. When we actually get in touch with the things that we filter our lives with are actually the things that are inside us, then we can start to get more into the hobbies that we like. Let's say you really like video games, but maybe you like commenting on video games. You're like, hey, this is something I could get into. I've always wanted to do it, but I've always doubted myself. Or you write beautiful poetry and you keep it all to yourself. You're like, hey, what if I made this into a poetry book? And so oftentimes when we don't feel empowered in our wholeness, we don't end up sharing it into the world. And so I'd say, if you don't have people in your life right now that you can be your whole self with, the best way you can live your life is putting a bat signal out there. And so when you put out your poetry into the world to people who are safe, or even just to yourself, or you continue writing poetry, like you don't give up on writing poetry because you like poetry, that is a form of keeping your bat signal alive, so that when people have the opportunity to come into your lives, they can. But you don't need people to feel whole. You could actually feel whole in yourself by confronting the ways you may not see yourself as good enough.
Beautiful. So, Joyce, thank you so much for being on my channel and being a great guest and providing this wonderful wisdom.